Hi, my name is Roger Lemaitre. I'm the president and CEO of UEX Corporation. Today with me also is our vice president of exploration, Chris Hamel. Wave Chris and say everything. UEX is a uranium explorer and developer focused primarily in the Athabasca Basin. And I think what we bring to the table is a little bit different for our investors than, say, the usual uranium company that you do see out there. We're a portfolio of opportunities. While we have several development-ready projects and development projects in development that we partner up with other companies, we also span a portfolio of projects right from grassroots through up to those development-ready projects. And what we do is give our investors the opportunity to be leveraged to the price of uranium because we have a large uranium resource holding. We also allow you to get exposure to mine development projects, but because we're not the operator of the more shorter term projects, we're able to focus on growth through exploration discovery on what we believe is one of the top portfolios in the top area for junior explorers in the uranium sector to be working.
Roger, thank you. That's a great introduction. Chris, nice to be on here with you.
Good morning, Merlin. Nice to meet you.
Hi. Now, I've got a little bit of track record in the uranium space, and I worked in West Africa with Stephen Roman and George Flack on Global Atomic. And I never really knew much about the Athabasca Basin. And when I came to your presentation in the research for this meeting, I went through your videos. I spent a good bit of time on YouTube last night going through some of your presentations. And it's an extraordinary portfolio. And I'm so interested in what you're doing. Before we get into the nitty gritty, perhaps, of my questions, could you tell me what the thrust of your exploration efforts are going to be over the next, in 2022? Where are you going to be where are you going to be focusing your geological brains and your drill rigs in the course of next year?
I think very easily for us to focus in on two projects: our Christie Lake project and our Hidden Bay project. And we're going to do very much our best efforts to get our partner Orano to help us work a little more at Shea Creek, where things have been idle for a couple of years, but we don't control that necessarily. So we'll focus on Hidden Bay, which we think is one of the best basement-hosted deposit trains in the basin, and Christie Lake, which is a relatively unexplored trend of the host of McArthur River deposit, and that continues onto our property, and it's still relatively underexplored.
And will the budgets for both of them be roughly equal, or are you going to split it some other way between the two, Hidden Bay and Christie Lake?
Definitely more money into the Christie Lake angle of things. One of them, but not necessarily. That doesn't necessarily mean that we test less targets. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Hidden Bay is very, very shallow. Our deep holes there are 200 meters deep. And that goes way into the basement terrain. So we actually get a lot more mileage in terms of targets tested at Hidden Bay for a lot less money.
Okay, great. And how deep are the holes that you're going to have to be drilling at Christie Lake? I mean, if let's say your average hole depth is down to 200 meters in Hidden Bay, what are you looking at in Christie Lake? And obviously there's water around as well, so maybe barge drilling or winter drilling. So
Christie Lakes has about between 400 and 420 meters of sandstone. Not too much glacial overburden, somewhere between 30 to 50 meters if you end up on top of a drumlin. The beauty of that property is that there's very little obstacles in the way of lakes or ice drilling. So while we might have a few holes on the ice in 2022, the large component of the program is going to be from land.
Okay, great, thank you. Now, Roger, perhaps could you give me a kind of a bird's eye view of what's happening in the Athabasca Basin in terms of, there's a lot of activity on the east, there's a lot of activity on the west, and how many mines are actually still operating in the Athabasca Basin? Is it just McArthur River?
Right now, the only actual mine that's physically operating is the Cigar Lake mine, which is the Cameco operation with Orano. The McArthur River mine is on care and maintenance because of the until recently, the price of uranium was so low and long-term contracts were challenging. Also, the Rabbit Lake mine, also Cameco, 100% owned project, is idle. Has been idle for about 4 years now. So it's in care and maintenance as well. So those are the three operable mines in the basin right now. And we have the significant other opportunities that the juniors are trying to develop.
And they're all on the eastern margin, that's right?
Current mines are all on the eastern side. There has been one operation historically on the west side that was now is the predecessor of Orano, but it's called Kojima back in the early 2000s. In the late 1990s was the Cluff Lake operation that they ran there for about 25 years, if I recall correctly. And that's the only operation that's been on the west side. Everything else has been on the east side.
And is it going to be what sustainable uranium price do you expect is required before you see the McArthur Rivers and Rabbit Lakes coming back on?
I think realistically, you're looking at a $50 to $60 price, but in a long-term sustainable contracting price to be incentivized to bring things back into production. For Rabbit Lake, it'll probably be a little bit higher just because of the volume that goes through there versus the volume that goes through McArthur River. But you look at most of the operating opportunities out there, they're kind of the incentivized price you need to get there.
And so do you mentally explore with the kind of a $60 per pound kind of threshold as your, or 50? I mean, what do you, when you start a kind of an exploration discussion, what do you use as kind of your internal guide, your internal reference?
For the company, strategically wise, we're very conscious about being positioned in the lowest cost half of the cost curve. And I think in the uranium space, if you're not in the lowest cost half, it can be painful. And McArthur River is a very good example of that. I mean, it's the lowest cost quartile, and it struggled in 2-3 years ago with the uranium price when you don't have long-term contracts to support it. And so if you want to not be more than just a swing producer, you want to be in an area that historically has been low cost half. And I think it's pretty fair to say that almost every operation that's come to fruition in the Athabasca Basin since its inception back in the late 1960s has been in that low cost half. There are obviously projects around the rest of the world on a one-off basis that would say, yeah, this will fit low cost half as well. But historically, usually discovery that's economic in the Athabasca Basin will fit that low cost half. So that's part of our search strategy about why we're focused in the Athabasca Basin. And then two, yes, without a doubt, looking at opportunities that are in the low cost half are very, very important to us because it's just too hard. It's a very expensive proposition to build a mine, never mind in a uranium mine. It's a long-term process as well. It takes probably a couple more years than a typical mine would take because of the regulatory angle of uranium. So you have to know that you're going to be able to be profitable when you come up the back end of that.
When you say the low cost half, do you mean profitable below 50 or profitable below 60?
I would say profitable below 50, to be fair. You need to leave something on the table as well. Most people who invest in mines would sure love to get their capital recovery as well. So,
yeah, but it's hard to find. It's hard to find a uranium deposit that's profitable below 50. I mean, that's why there are so few development projects
very much
that work at basically current prices.
I think you're absolutely right. And then the risk, you have to be able to handle the risk of the flow of the market. And if you don't have that low cost half, you're struggling. And we've seen producers that emerged in the last cycle struggle when they couldn't leverage off that price.
One of the features of the Athabasca are these extremely high grades. Anywhere else in the world, you talk about ppm. Your ore content is in ppms. In Namibia, it's 200, maybe 400 ppm, which is 0.04%. Similarly, in many parts of Australia, in Niger, it's slightly different. The grades are higher. They're 0.1%, maybe up to 0.5% on average, maybe some portions up to 1%, which is 10,000 ppm. But most of the Athabasca stuff that you see is much higher. I know you've got Horseshoe and Raven, which is 0.2, 0.1%, but that's right at surface. What are the challenges of those super high grades or anything? And sorry, let's ask another way. At what grade are you going up? 0.3, 0.5, 0.7% U3O8. At what grade does it become a challenge to conventional mining that you have to do things very differently?
There's two angles. One is the grade and one is the geological setting. And the geological setting is a huge component of that. So deposits that form at the unconformity itself and if they happen to be strongly altered and a lot of brittle fracturing through the fault zone, have water challenges. So it's not even as much the grade, it could be the water challenges. We've seen that happen at both Cigar and McArthur River. So that's one angle. The grade angle where things get more difficult probably starts to happen around the 2.5% to 4% range, depending on structure, where you have to be a little more cognizant of the radioactive issues, particularly radon and exposure. So that brings slightly more remote mining techniques, etc. Moving slurries instead. So the costs on operating costs per ton definitely go way up. Of course, there's a lot more pounds in there, so it sort of works out. But historically, and I would argue that Chris and I are both friends of the Eagle Point mine, the Cameco run. When that mines run optimally, it's really about what you can make on a per pound basis, and you balance those things off. McArthur River and Rabbit Lake wouldn't be that far apart on a cost per pound basis.
The high grade offsets the greater cost of doing the high grade material and the extra safety work that you need to do it. And you mentioned kind of faulting and fracturing on that unconformity. Is that a when you get the mineralization on the unconformity above the basin, above the basement, at the bottom of the basin, is that are those typically stratiform bodies that are laterally extensive? How poddy are they? How much structural control is on them? Or once you're in it, do you know that you've got a good run of delineating resources?
Chris, I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, those the unconformity pods are really the classic the classic Athabasca prototype or type deposits. And you'll get those at the subcrop of the fault, and they can be laterally cross strike. You can see those for it's typically 30 to 50 meters in an economic deposit. Probably the outlier there would be Cigar Lake, which is closer to 50. Whereas a typical unconformity deposit would be about 30 meters across strike, and you see that at Phoenix. And then you can start really, for those unconformity deposits, for them to be economic, you really want to trace them, depending on grade, of course. Every answer starts with an it depends. But you really want to start seeing, those unconformity deposits, about 500 meters, sometimes more. If they're high enough grade, they can be somewhat less. And that really helps us. With UEX, we do have we do have a lot of experience looking in the basement, and we are excited about basement mineralization, and particularly when you get to deposits like a McArthur River and a Zone 2 at McArthur River, which was mined for about a decade. That the strike length of that deposit being in the basement was only about 60 meters. So you can build a lot of pounds in a very small place in those basement settings, which starts to make them very attractive targets.
Yeah, I think just go back, the Athabasca Basin is basically a big an old clawfoot type bathtub filled with sand and saturated sand. So anything you want to do above the bottom of the bathtub, from a mining point of view, is subject to all that water that can come through the sand. And so the cost to mine those tend to be higher. You take that same amount of uranium and put it into something that more resembles a lode gold vein type deposit in the basement, in the cracks that are in that bathtub. You have less exposure to potential water issues. And so we're finding that those tend to be easily as economic, particularly when you have thicker sandstone cover.
Okay, thank you. That's a really good analogy. Chris, coming back to you said, when depending on the fault, is that you're essentially saying that, let's say my hand is at the bottom of the bottom of the basin, and you're saying that there's always a single feeder fault or a dominant feeder fault through the basement, which emplaces the mineralization proximal to that fault?
Yeah. Generally, every deposit begins with a fault, and yeah, much like you suggested, you have if you have the bottom of the basin and the fault that typically comes up to it, you're going to see it at McArthur River, Cigar Lake, Christie Lake. That's the fault's always the key, and it's typically you see a lot of people talk about conductors. When you hear about the Athabasca Basin and exploration companies, you always hear about conductors, and what the conductor represents is a graphitic rocks that when you subject them to an EM survey, it forms a conductor. And being that they're graphitic, it's a plane of weakness. So when you end up with those nice long regional type features that can, when you apply the regional strain, those rocks will break preferentially and bring the the reducing basement fluids, or basically the basement fluids into connection with the oxidized overlying sandstone fluids, which are hopefully uranium bearing. And that's when you start to see deposits. So those are the areas where you see the deposits start to precipitate.
We believe that the graphite forms a very efficient reductant that allows that uranium to be more efficiently removed from the hydrothermal solutions, probably the reason why you get the high grades in the Athabasca Basin.
Okay, so we've got the kind of the physical and the chemical mechanisms for kind of precipitating uranium in a specific point. Let's bring it to your two projects that we're going to talk about, Christie Lake and Hidden Bay. And do you use seismic to pick up the structure underneath? Can you use mag to pick up the structure underneath? What's your localizing? How do you kind of center in on a trend or a structure underneath whatever it is, 200 meters of cover?
Yeah. Magnetics and airborne EM are very efficient methods for inferring local geology or the metasedimentary corridor, if you will. Corridor metasediments that in the Athabasca Basin, typically the base of the metasedimentary units on top of the Archean domes is typically where you see a nice unit of peelite that is graphitic, and so those will preferentially break. And then also the competency contrast between the overlying peelites and the underlying Archean dome also forms a very efficient competency contrast in terms of helping that structure form permeability going down into the basement as well. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. And then, was there another part that I'm missing?
There's a little bit of, some people have been using seismic in certain areas. It's probably not the most efficient process. It's doable. It's probably not the most efficient. It's been a lot of money and effort put into it. And I think we're seeing seismic in the Athabasca Basin, usually at a really advanced stage, and often helpful with mine planning as well. We're seeing some of that as well, where you do seismic work to see where the unconformity tops or highs are, so you can sink, if you have to sink a shaft, it's a shorter distance through the sandstone. But as an exploration tool, some people will swear by it, but it's a very, very small minority. For us on our Hidden Bay and Christie Lake projects, Hidden Bay is a pretty mature project in some ways and a very immature project in others. So it's one of the oldest projects in the Athabasca Basin from an exploration point of view, and it was looked at exclusively in the past for classic unconformity cigar-like deposits, like Chris was talking about, straddling that boundary. So we know where the corridors are already from mag and actual drill holes. So for us, it's about saying, we know that every one of these basement deposits that form below the unconformity has smoke at the unconformity. And so we're at Hidden Bay, we're focused about chasing the smoke down into the basement. And we have an extensive database of drill holes that allow us to do that very efficiently without having to do lots of geophysics. At Christie Lake, we probably know where one trend is extremely well. We're still trying to figure out the others. So there's more EM and mag work done there in those projects.
Can I just, for my simple brain, can I just focus on Hidden Bay for the moment?
Sure.
Otherwise I'll get more confused than I might otherwise be. So you've got a lot of drill hole data. Are you targeting a number of subvertical structures in the basement? Is that kind of the main exploration target? So it's high grade, potentially, we all hope for big tons, but kind of most likely in the first pass, it's going to be a relatively constrained tonnage if it's structurally controlled.
I think that's a really good synopsis. Yeah, absolutely. It's the basement structures, and Roger and I both have experience at Eagle Point, and I think and also from our time at Cameco, we've seen deposits like Millennium as well, also a basement deposit. And it really, I think really the discovery of Arrow in the Arrow deposit in 2014 really helped kick a lot more people over into the idea that the basement deposits can host a lot of tonnage and be really significant. And I'm not going to say that we're going to go find an Arrow at Hidden Bay, but man, that sure be nice. Yeah, like that, we do believe that there is the potential for that type of deposit there. So,
And what do you see as I don't know, kind of a tonnage or a grade? What do you say? Okay, now we've got an economic potential here. What are the metrics that you have in your head as this is turning out to be? Even before PEAs, just kind of thumb suck. What do you think is a kind of an economic starter? Does it have to be 50 million pounds at 2%?
Maybe not necessarily 2%. 50 million pounds is a pretty good start, especially in the Eastern Athabasca Basin, and particularly on our Hidden Bay project, where we have infrastructure. We literally bound up on 2 world-class mills. So the bar is a little bit lower in terms of the economic threshold. Could it be, and I would argue that, 1 to 2% is a pretty good average grade for deposit in the basin. But I think it depends on its geometry. It does really depend a lot on its geometry and how close to surface it is. And when I look at our Horseshoe Raven project, well, it's only 0.2%. It's right at surface, no water issues, very simple mining technique. So it starts to, I think your guideline is about right, but then you have to look at each thing one off against each other.
Okay. And can you to kind of summarize what you're planning for 2022 at Hidden Bay and where you'd like to get to? What would constitute success in your mind if you're kind of 6 or 9 months through next year?
Yeah, absolutely. The Hidden Bay project for 2022, where we want to go follow up some holes we drilled in 2021 on our Vixen grid. And that's a exciting target where there's actually a glacial train of uranium bearing boulders down ice of that area. And when we started putting drill holes into that area in 2021, we quickly started to see hydrothermal alteration and structural characteristics that are very similar to Horseshoe and Raven. So that starts to get us really excited about the potential of that area in building, building resources in that area. The other area where we want to work at Hidden Bay is we call that the Dwyer grid, and it's a little bit farther to the south. And UEX did some work there in 2015, and we'd like to go and follow up on some of that work, as well as follow up on some of our target generation and evaluation of the old drill core. Has determined that there's exploration potential in that area that we believe hasn't been followed up by the first pass drilling done in the 70s and 80s.
The success would look like the first mineralized intersection on a new discovery on those 2 next year, or one of those 2 next year.
And I suffer in my day job from being asked, when are you going to define a resource? A resource can take a while to come together. But you talk, Roger, you just mentioned the word, a discovery drill hole. What looks like a discovery? I mean, because if I get Chris alone, I bet he would say, as long as we get the hydrothermal stuff and we got some sniffs of mineralization and we get some good grades coming through, he would say, look, this is enough to motivate the next campaign of exploration. What would you classify as a discovery hole?
I'm going to let Chris answer that question, because I think we're going to have a really simple answer. Honestly, I think that's a very simple answer. Yeah,
last year we did, particularly at Vixen, we did a first pass series of drill holes, and we did have that hydrothermal alteration. We did have that system, and so that it satisfied that first pass prospectivity evaluation. And so this year, we want to target some more resource. We want to use more resources to evaluate that, and so that's what success looks like for that Vixen grid in that uranium nickel sands target area, and really success is a mineralized hole, and we have our template very close to that area is Raven and Horseshoe. And at Raven and Horseshoe, we can see mineralized intersections that are 10 to 20 meters wide in some cases, and like you said, that that 0.1 to 0.2 grades. So that's sort of what the lens with which we view what success looks like in that area, and why we're excited about it, because it is less than 2 kilometers away from an area where we do have those defined resources.
Okay. Great, thank you. That really helps me put things in context. Moving over to Christie Lake, you've got 3 kind of pods or pearls on a string, I think was the phrase you used in one of your videos, Roger. what's next? Are you trying to expand one of those pearls, or are you looking for the next pearl?
I think I'll let Chris expand upon it a little bit more. I think just setting the table for Chris was more of it's really weird. We've had the project for about 5.5 years now, and we did build a 5-year plan before we did drilled our first drill hole there. And our thoughts were very much along the lines of what we're thinking there's one big corridor, and there's 3 prospective trends in that corridor. And then there's another corridor to the south that hasn't seen a drill hole historically. And our plan when year 1 was to grow the deposit at Paul Bay, which was the known deposit there at the time. And we did do that, but we learned something, and we thought there was no unconformity potential along that trend for classic Cigar Lake style unconformity deposit. And we very quickly learned in year 1 that was not true. And that even with our due diligence review, what the Corps told us when we drilled holes, which we couldn't access because it had been burnt to the ground back in the past, said, oh no, there's a lot of unconformity potential here. And we focused the last few years on exploring that potential. So now we're actually going to go back to year 2 of our original plan, which is looking along that trend for basement hosted deposits, and then start to focus our efforts on the other 2 sub-trends that are within that corridor going back towards the McArthur River Mine. But Chris, you might want to talk a little bit more of the detail of what we're trying to focus on.
Sorry, Chris, before you jump in, and Roger, is that because the unconformity exploration was difficult? No,
just because it was an untested. It's always the easiest thing to explore for. I mean, while we're big advocates of basement deposits, I don't think even the most ardent basement advocate like Chris and I will be, would ever say give up on the unconformity potential first. You'd always test that first. And so that's why we deviated the program in year 2 to test that. And it was successful. We did find a smaller deposit at Ōrora along that unconformity trend, and we were continuing to focus on that through to next year. We would have done it faster in more robust uranium times. We did it very calculated and slow because we were very conscious about the size of exploration budgets over the last 4 years.
Great, thank you. And Chris, onto the basement. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, no problem. And that work over the from 2016 through to 2021 has layered on a lot of additional data regarding the geology, and particularly the structure and alteration, not only of the deposits at Paul Bay, Kenpen, and Ōrora, but also given us a lot of insights into the structural controls along the trend. And and I think rather than going in and testing systematically along the basement, the information that we've gathered is going to allow us to be very precise with our targets and what we want to drill. The technical team here and I have been working on a plan for Christie Lake for quite some time, and we're really excited to put this into action because we, one of the first things we did when we picked up Christie Lake and started drilling holes is we didn't get a geology map from the previous operator, so we put together a geology map, and we continue to refine that geology map along with the structure and the structural controls of these deposits. We refine that with every drill hole we put into it, and we're starting to see a lot of similarities between the deposits and some of the areas where there's sporadic basement mineralization that hasn't been followed up, and that really helps us with where we want to vector work in 2022.
It's not like we're blindly testing. It's Chris and his team's got a model saying here's the structural controls, here's a spot of mineralization in the basement. We tested the unconformity. Now we got to go down plunge. Not even just down dip, but down plunge of intersecting features.
Down plunge of intersecting structure or intersecting structure with the unconformity.
Yeah. So the way that I'd say that, Merlin, is if you take your fault again, and really it's the idea of a structure coming across that controlling structure and forming that lineation that plunges down into the basement. And not only so in those instances, obviously that lineation line is your primary target, but quite often we see mineralization in both. It's possible to see mineralization in both planes, both up and down that crossing structure, and also along the main graphitic fault as well. So those are both targets in that scenario for us.
And I think that every high grade deposit in the Athabasca Basin, be it at the unconformity or be it in the basement, occurs where the main trend is offset or intersected, not necessarily offset, by subsidiary structures in a classic Riddell pattern. Our Hidden Bay project, our Shea Creek project is a very good example of that.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And you've mentioned building a kind of a geological map of the subsurface and using the drill holes. Presumably, you're overlaying the mag on that as well. And you've mapped out the main kind of stress orientations in that part of the basin. So you've got a handle on where the subordinate shears and the Riedel patterns come. So you're using that combined data set to target any resources there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've also got a very good resistivity data set for that project as well, too. So, we layer every piece of information we have to help us with that interpretation so that the money is spent as best as possible, really, is how we think of it. Okay.
Can you just describe to me the timings on that? When are you going to get started? Are you able to work through the winter, or is it a spring summer program?
We can work in the winter at Christie Lake, and because of the majority of the drill targets, particularly along that Ball Bay to Ōrora Trend, in the bay are reachable from land as well too. So we can work in both the winter and summer, early fall seasons. So we have about in the winter, there's about 100-day window, give or take, and then you have about 120 days window in the summer in order to get at these areas.
So, are you going to be active in this 100-day winter window?
We hope to be, yes.
Hope to be. No, we will be.
Okay, there you go. I didn't want to be the point of disclosure there, so thanks, Roger.
And have you announced how much drilling you're going to do? I mean, is that public information or?
Not yet. It's imminent news for us to put out here. I was hoping we'd have that out earlier than we have, but we haven't done that. We've just been through our budgeting process with our board, so.
Okay. And well, I won't go into that. That'll all come out in the wash. Can you give me kind of rough guidelines of the spend that you're going to be doing next year? How much of it is kind of going into these kinds of field programs? Hidden Bay, Christie Lake. Is it 50% of your kind of field budget, or 70%?
About 100, almost 100.
Okay, so this is where it's at. It's Hidden Bay and it's Christie Lake.
Yeah, and unless our friends at Orano miraculously come around to our point of view that they were dire need of working at Shea Creek, and while we press upon them that multiple times a week, it's really they're the operator and they have control of the project right now, and so we're influencing them best we can, because we think that's, as much as we like Christie and we like Hidden Bay, that's for us the number one target in the Athabasca Basin, whether it's our own project or anybody else's, actually.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the numbers, I mean, it's stunning. You would have got 68 million pounds in indicated and 28 million pounds in inferred, and grades above 1%, or 1% in the inferred and 1.4 in the indicated. It's smashing, and according to you, it's got growth potential.
Yeah. Once again, talking about Chris and his intersecting fault structures, Chris's team spent a lot of time going through every scrap of information we had, reviewing drill core. And the strangest part for us, and the part that's really hard to understand our partners' reluctance, would be 50% of the pounds that we see at Shea Creek are hosted in the Kenna deposit. 90% of the Kenna deposit's in the basement below the Unconformity, actually drawn out along that cross-cutting fault structure. And so Chris' team has identified those same fault structures. I'll be conservative to say only 10 higher priority targets and multiple others, where other structures like that are known to exist and hit the main trend. And at the Unconformity, it's mineralized. And they've been trying to drill those holes with vertical drill holes into a subvertical body. And you can imagine how hard that is to hit. And they actually have to drill with a north-south component on an angle. But every once in a while, when they do hit it, Chris and his team have found mineralization or alteration in the structure. And so it's not a question of whether or not is there a mineralized structure there. The question is there enough in that mineralized structure to be economic? And we just believe that we can grow that deposit by getting a very focused and fairly cost-effective program. It's not, I'm not talking hundreds of millions of dollars to do this. You're talking, each target doesn't cost a lot to test.
How deep are they? If you're doing an angled hole, what kind of length hole are you talking about?
The depth of the unconformity at Shea Creek is give or take about 700 meters. So if you want to start testing those targets into the basement, you could be looking at drill holes up to 900 meters at the bottom of the Kiana deposit in order to test those cross-cutting structures. But the thing is that if the mineralization's there and it's in the basement, that's not that technically challenged in order to get to. The operator has used directional drilling there for a number of years in order to accurately test the targets, and it wouldn't be a new technology or a stretch to believe that for a program on the scale of about $10 million, we could test 10 or so of those high priority targets that we've developed at Shea Creek.
The geologist in me gets excited about lots of untested targets and high potential. The realist in me says that we'll have to wait to see what Orano says. Roger, Chris, thank you so much. You've taken me on a huge learning curve about the Athabasca Basin. Apologies for asking dumb questions, and apologies to any viewers who have had to repeat their education because of my ignorance. Any parting thoughts? I know we haven't spoken about the rest of the portfolio, but do you want to put some of that into context, Roger? Just kind of give a bit of polish to my rude questions.
No, fair enough. The beautiful part about our portfolio and our advanced development projects is that for the ones that we don't control, which is, right now our Horseshoe Raven is the only one we control 100% of, and it's probably not ready to go tomorrow towards development. But the ones like Wheeler River and then the following that will probably be Millennium. We don't have to operate those projects, so we can focus on the growth part of our business. And the growth part of the business for investors on when that's new discovery, is where the value is generated, regardless of the time of the uranium cycle, up, down, or otherwise. And the type of targets that we talked to you about today, and this isn't us owning a hunk of moose pasture and saying, hey, we think there could be something here. We just stake this ground and we hope there's stuff here. We're down to sort of the what you do in a brownfields mine site exploration program, even at Hidden Bay, where you're going, we know there's something in this area. The question is how much? And it's about prosecuting lower risk exploration, because we're basically doing brownfields type exploration work across all of our projects.
Great. Thank you. That's a useful summary. I've got two more questions, I'm afraid. One is, at what price do you kind of kickstart the PEA on Horseshoe and Raven? Are you waiting for the exploration on Hidden Bay, or are you going to go ahead with kind of pushing the button on a PEA for Horseshoe Raven?
I think we'd like to see it go up a couple more bucks first. But we're really our PEA that we had on there that we had to retire last month in November because of its age, it was 10 years old. And I gotta be very careful about how I refer to it. That retired historical document now, it told us that the current price is really close to where the break even would be, and so it doesn't take a lot more oomph to get there. I think we need to see that we're going to be in a spot where there's a comfortable return on investment before we really jump, and it's not far away. Good.
And then the other question was, can you give us a figure on kind of budget in terms of what you're going to be spending, or is that going to come out in the news release?
That's going to come out in the news release. I think what we've been signaling to the market is that we expect our exploration tempo to be up substantially from where we are this year. Last year was probably the quietest year ever in the Athabasca Basin in the last 20. And this could be one of the busier years for the industry in general. This is how quickly things have turned. And I think our investors are telling us they want to see us do more work. And I can understand why, because we had a pretty quiet year last year in terms of exploration results because of the volume of work that was done. So significantly higher. That's all I'll tell you right now.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much. I look forward to having another update, perhaps once, Chris, you've put some drill holes in and found some cracking mineralization for us to talk about.
I sure hope to have that conversation.
Roger, Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marilyn.